welcome to part 2 of my Blotter tutorial. In this tutorial, we're going to look at how to install Blotter.js in our project. As mentioned in my previous video, Blotter requires 2 script files to work, Blotter.js and a material script of your choice. You can find these over on Blotter's GitHub repo. You can download the minified version of Blotter.js here, and any of the material scripts from this link here. Now, I've already added these to our starter project. You can find them over here on the left-hand side. And I've also added our script tags into our HTML. If you're adding these yourself, make sure that you add them in the correct order. We've got jQuery first, then we've got Blotter.js, followed by our material script, and lastly, we've got the JavaScript file that we're going to add our own custom code to. Let's take a look at what is in script.js so far. All I've added in here is just a jQuery document ready function, and this is just going to make sure that our HTML is loaded before our JavaScript runs. We're going to add our code in between these curly braces, and to get started, let's head over to Blotter's documentation to see how to set things up. Now, as with most libraries, they come with pretty good documentation, and Blotter is no different. Here we've got an example. We can already see the 2 script tags here that I've already added, but we've also got a basic setup example just below. So let's get stuck in. This is the bit that we're interested in, and you can see that there are a few lines that we need to add as the basic setup. Firstly, we need to look at adding some text. This sets up which text we want Blotter to display and how we want it displayed, so we add some stylings. We've then got which material we want to add, followed by actually setting up a new Blotter instance with the material and the text that we've added. We then create a canvas or a scope, adding the Blotter setup to it. And finally, we need to find somewhere in our HTML to actually display our new animation. So let's start from the top. Let's have a go at doing our text first. So in between our curly brackets, hit enter, and we're actually going to use a constant here instead of a variable. So I'm going to write const and then text equals, and then new Blotter text, some curly brackets, and then inside of those curly brackets, we need to add the text that we want Blotter to display. We're going to be using some Chinese symbols, and these symbols basically mean dim sum. I'm going to go ahead and copy and paste them from the HTML of our project. So that's the first value that this Blotter needs to set up, so that's going to be our text. After that, we need a comma, and then some curly brackets. And these curly brackets are basically going to hold our styles. Now, Blotter can do a lot of styles in its setup, so let's take a look at them now. You can find them over on the Blotter.js documentation. And we can do things like set the font family, we can set the size of the text we want to display, we can set the leading, which is the spacing between text. We've got the fill, style, weight, padding, and that's about it. So we're going to go and set up a few of these. So I'm going to hit enter once, and I'm going to start with setting up the font family. We're using something called Playfair Display here. This is a Google font which I've set up in our HTML. Because I'm trying to make this tutorial as short as possible, I'm not going to use a font loader here, but it's a good idea to add one if you are using Google Fonts in JavaScript, just to make sure that your Google font is loaded at the correct time, i.e. before the JavaScript. So I set the font family, I've now set the size. These values are all pretty much arbitrary and really dependent on the design of your own project. So I've set the size. I'm also giving it a kind of dark brown colour to kind of match with the rest of our stylings. So I'm using a hex code here. And then what I'm going to do is add some padding. I'm going to add padding to each side of our text. And this is to give it a little bit more room to kind of dance around. In our final design, you'll see that it kind of moves around the page quite a lot. And that's because I've added this padding to the top, right, bottom and left, adding slightly more to the top and the bottom just to give it space to move up and down. Okay, we won't be able to see anything yet because this actually requires that we do all the steps before it works. Let's head on back to GitHub to see what the next step is. You can see here that he's added a material next. So we're going to do exactly the same, but we're not using the channel split material, we're using the liquid distort material. So make sure you are outside of the previous set of brackets, and then let's use a constant again, and I'm going to do constant material. Oh, spelling material right. And let's create a new instance of the Blotter class, liquid distort material. Cool. So much like our text, we have some properties that we can set depending on which material we are using. Let's head over to the Blotter documentation to see some of the properties that come with our liquid distort material. Blotter is quite handy that it shows you for each material a little demonstration, and over in the top right hand corner we can see the properties that we can set. Let's start with U-speed. U-speed starts at 0 and can go all the way up to 5, and what U-speed does is it essentially sets the speed of our animation. The higher the number, the quicker the speed, the lower the number, the slower it goes. We've also got U-volatility. This is all about how volatile our animation is. So this goes from 0 to 1. And you can see when it's all the way at 1, it really creates this kind of distorted wave-like pattern. The third property that we can set is called U-seed. Now this one is essentially a way of scrubbing through our animation. If we set the U-speed to 0, you can actually see that it pinpoints different keyframes and allows us to kind of display each one of them at a time. We're mostly interested in the first two properties, so we're going to set up some defaults in our starter project so we can actually see Blotter working when we finish the rest of the code. I can see to set the U-speed, we need to do material.uniforms.uspeed, and then to actually set the value, we need to add .value on the end. We're going to do exactly the same with U-volatility too. So let's head over and add some material defaults to get started. I'm going to do material.uniforms.uspeed.value, and I'm going to set this to something fairly small to begin with. Let's do the same, but this time for the U-volatility. Set it to something like 0.2. Okay, so we've got our text defaults and our material defaults all set up. Let's have a look at what the next step is. So we're now going to add our material defaults and our text together and initialize a new blotter with our custom code. So let's go ahead and do that on the lines below. So I'm going to add a constant again. And I'm going to go blotter this time and make it equal to a new version of blotter. This time adding the material like this. And on the line below, I'm going to use blotter.addText to add our setup text from above. We then need to do the next step, which is actually bringing it all together. So let's take a look over here again. So we've got var scope equals blotter.forText text, and what this is doing is just bringing the text in that we want to add. So let's do that on the next line below. So this is kind of creating a canvas. So I'm going to do constant scope equals, and then we're going to do blotter dot for text. So if you imagine that this is kind of drawing and adding this to our scope. Finally, we need to decide where we want this effect to be shown in our HTML. Let's head over to the HTML, and the easiest way to do this is to add some classes. Now, we're going to want this blotter effect to actually run on two different areas, but to start with, we're just going to use it on one to keep things simple. You can see that I've added the blotter class on the first div with our Chinese symbols inside of them, with the class of foreground, and now the class of blotter as well. So head on back to our JavaScript file, and on the line below here, I'm now going to select our blotter element and add the canvas to it. So again, let's create a constant. I'm going to name it element. I'm going to use some jQuery here just for quickness. Div.blotter is what I'm going to add. And finally, we're going to use the scope and the append to method to attach this to our element. Okay, so now's the time for us to take a look at it. Let's see if that worked. I'm going to head over to our preview, hit refresh just to make sure we're looking at the most up-to-date version. And great, we can see that we've got this nice wavy effect showing up on our screen. However, this isn't quite finished. At the moment, it does not react to our mouse movements at all. And we've also only got one symbol showing. So in the next video, we're going to tackle how to add this to 2 or multiple places at once. And we're also going to take a look at attaching it to our mouse movement.